12 o'clock noon here in Moscow. Welcome to your Monday Worldwide Headlines on RT International. I'm Rory Suchet. Female fighters may now be operating within the ranks of Islamic State. Canadian intelligence group iBravo says it tracked down one such terrorist woman via Twitter after she left the geolocation feature on when posting. We've caught up with Jeff Weyers, the man behind this investigation.
This is the first documented case that we put out in our report with the Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium of a female being on the front lines. So when you look at her geolocation, what you see is on the 25th of December, when ISIS was really under siege by the coalition troops and by the YPG Kurdish troops, is that she was in Kobani when they were in one of the biggest battles for their existence in Kobani. My opinion would be she probably wasn't fighting. She was probably there for the purpose of intelligence.
There are very few details to shed light on who the woman actually is. She's never revealed her face or provided a name. The group simply calls her LA. Now, the woman allegedly came to Syria from Canada in December last year. She's been on the front line ever since. In fact, she's been pinpointed in major war zones like the city of Aleppo over there. Also on the Kurdish border, the town of Kobani here as well. That was when it was besieged by terrorists. She was there at that time. She's also a regular visitor to the city of Raqqa, the proclaimed capital of the Islamic Caliphate that the extremists there are trying to create. But all the way across the border here to Iraq and Mosul, she's been paying visits there, what Islamic State calls a key city in that country. Now, it's not the first time that iBravo has found people on social media. Last December, the group tracked geolocated tweets of a New Zealander who joined the ranks of Islamic State. Back then, Jeff Weyers explained how this information helps the authorities.
We were examining extremist members who are broadcasting out of ISIS-held territory. The potential benefit for the military is it would allow them to better identify ISIS safe houses and areas under ISIS control. It is a very important tool in terms of intelligence agencies being able to derive information on who's involved, who has an interest in these terrorist groups, what different tools they're using to recruit individuals into their membership. Whether you're looking at Twitter, whether you're looking at Facebook, and you look at the groups that are forming on these social media platforms, you see people along all different stages of the path to violent extremism. So you see people from the casually interested to the hardcore terrorists and recruiters.
And ironically, Islamic State has once again fallen victim to its own propaganda weapon of choice, social media. The group manages thousands of accounts to avoid deletion and always stays online. It tries to generate viral content like creating new internet themes, increasing the reach of their message. And they launch hashtag campaigns on Twitter, engaging their audience, but also attracting a lot of mockery and trolling as well. Now, Islamic State backers have been reported to post up to 40,000 tweets a day. But as the latest jihadi location revelations show, some of those posts nicely play out in favor of the enemies of Islamic State. RT International, thank you for joining us. For almost a year following the forceful regime change in Ukraine, the following has been Barack Obama's main line.
People and nations have the right to determine their own destiny, and that includes the people of Ukraine.
Courage of the Ukrainian people in standing up on behalf of democracy. Let the Ukrainians make their own decisions about their own lives.
An expression of people's free will, which in the end turned very ugly. And Russia's reaction to the events in Kiev was discussed by President Obama. This in his latest interview with CNN.
Since Mr. Putin made this decision around Crimea and Ukraine, not because of some grand strategy, but essentially because he was caught off balance by the protests in the Maidan and Yanukovych then fleeing after we had brokered a deal to transition power in Ukraine.
So the Ukrainians' expression of free will didn't come without a firm nudge from Washington after all. Now, in February last year, a deal was signed between the former Ukrainian president and the opposition to end the crisis peacefully. There were indeed foreign brokers present, but not from Washington. And despite the agreement, violence ensued. Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute believes Obama's admission sheds light on the murky truth.
Well, I think one thing that it says is the president can't get his story straight. There were probably a bunch of people having a heart attack in the State Department when he said that. But essentially it's true. What I wonder is if it's true on a different level than we even know, maybe the deal we brokered is something that the president and the U.S. State Department was doing behind the scenes while the EU was engaged in negotiating with Yanukovych and negotiating this sort of transition of power away from the president. As we know, that night was a very mysterious night. Everyone went to bed thinking that a deal was brokered to stave off the violence that followed, where we woke up in the morning and power had been seized by a group that was close to the U.S. So maybe he was telling more truth than he meant to tell in that statement.
And 1 year after the power change, Kiev remains stuck in a bloody conflict with those who are not happy with the new regime. And the U.S. keeps supporting Kiev with loans to prop up its war-torn economy and non-lethal equipment for its army. And the chief of America's military forces in Europe admits weapons could soon be sent. While no representative showed up to the recent round of peace talks, Daniel McAdams again saying that's indicative of Washington's actual goals in Ukraine.
But we've been hearing this garbage for more than a decade. The U.S. claimed that the Orange Revolution was purely the action of Ukrainians who wanted a better life. And certainly there's an element of that in all color revolutions. There's an element of people who genuinely, A, want a better life and who doesn't, and B, who buy into the West propaganda that if you just do X, Y, or Z, you'll be living like the Swiss, rich and happy. That's always the case. But the reality is the U.S. has pumped in billions of dollars in Ukraine. We all know the quote from Newland that the U.S. has spent $5 billion promoting democracy in Ukraine. It's not even up for discussion. The U.S. financed the Orange Revolution, and Victoria Nuland and the State Department was heavily involved in this latest revolution in Ukraine.
Well, last year's mayhem in Kiev started with calls to topple the government, voiced from a stage in the city's central square. Calls like the following one coming your way now, heard at a rally of National Guard fighters just days ago.
Не верьте пропаганде Порошенко. Сегодня они об отдаленном братстве рассказывают, что мы якобы пытаемся расшатать изнутри страну. Говорят о том, что мы приведем сюда полки с передовой снимем для того, чтобы их выбросить из кабинетов. Я говорю тебе, Порошенко, очень много о себе ты возомнил. Нам не нужно сюда приводить полки. Нас достаточно здесь находится при поддержке народа. Мы это сделаем.
The soldiers showed they were ready to back up their words with action. They broke into the Ministry of Defense, getting into a brawl with local security. The National Guard members are angry at the government's decision to reform the unit. And these are the people that, until recently, were fighting in Kiev's campaign far in the east of Ukraine. And the fighting there shows no sign of letting up. Civilians, as usual, bearing the brunt. RT's Roman Kosarev reports from the embattled city of Donetsk.
The city of Donetsk came under another round of artillery shelling on Sunday. The mayor of the city is taking us with him right now to go and see some of the damages. A public transport depot, one of 4 in Donetsk, was shelled by an .82 caliber mortar in the early hours of Sunday. Several trolley buses were destroyed, with shocked commuters picking up shell fragments that barely missed them. The self-proclaimed head of Donetsk is used to making rounds like this in his city.
We have what we have. Covert enemy groups are operating in Donetsk right now. This depot is just one of several locations that came under fire. A high school was also damaged by shelling. We all have to be very vigilant now and catch them by any means possible.
According to the mayor, one of these covert groups was also responsible for the shelling of another nearby school, where a mortar landed right on the roof. Fortunately, there were no fatalities during the strike. That's because the school year didn't resume as it was supposed to in September due to the ongoing conflict. But worryingly, with the fighting again intensifying, the authorities plan to reopen classrooms as early as next week. Roman Kosarev, RT Donetsk.
Coming up here on RT International, mind your manners when getting into an Uber taxi. Drivers can now rate their passengers, even giving you an F for sitting too quietly. We'll tell you some of the reasons drivers are handing out low marks. That's on the way. Also, US students' debts, they're going up and up, leaving jobless college graduates to wonder whether all that money and investment was actually worth it. Have a look at this, climbing up an icy wall. You're watching here amazing footage, the latest historic ascent by William Gadd. His friends call him Captain Adventure for a good reason. He's the first person to conquer Niagara Falls when it's all frozen. We caught up with him. He described his fearless feat.
What really fires me up about doing any sort of climbing is figuring out a problem and solving it well and in an interesting, cool way. For me, this is just figuring out a really complicated puzzle in an interesting way. First thing you want to do with ice climbing is not fall off. If I fell off while I was climbing, especially down low, I would have ended up in this kind of cauldron of doom where the water was all swirling. And the second thing is just what an amazing place to be, you know? I was climbing Niagara Falls. How cool is that? It's really hard to get permission to do what I did. It took a lot of people working at it. And even when I started climbing it, I kept waiting for this bullhorn or this big yell, stop, you can't do that, you know? So when I finally got to the top, I was just really, really happy that it had all come together and we'd done it safely.
Yeah, boys! Woo! Yeah, William is an action sports hero. He's won every major ice climbing title from the World Cup to the X Games. Though he doesn't limit himself to climbing, he loves, well, biking, hockey, parachuting, skydiving. Clearly, this adreno junkie is happier living on the frayed ends of sanity.